All of us at some point in time are going to experience a loss that's going to create grief. There's no two ways about it. My joke, which is not a joke at all, is that nobody gets out for free. Grief, if you have a death that's natural in the trajectory of life, it might be a grandparent, or as you age, your parent. Those are very difficult to manage, but we have a better grasp of managing those because we consider them to be the natural order of life. However, if you're an adult and you have a child that dies, or you're a parent and you have grandchildren and children, and a child dies of yours, so you have the grandchildren to help, you have the spouse to help, and so some of that is very traumatic. There's death where the natural order is changed. There's also traumatic death. It could be someone drives to work and there's a car accident. It could be a heart attack. It could be a stroke. Could be a murder. It could be an unexpected type of thing. Could be a child's rape. There's so many different ways that we have a loss that creates grief. There's also what are considered lesser losses, but I don't know if the grief is any less with them. But it could be loss of a beloved pet in the family, could be a move, could be a divorce, could be a career change. And sometimes, it might be an amalgamation of those. You might have lost a child 2 years ago, and then you have a career change, and then another family member is lost. So you might have 2 or 3 or 4 things that all kind of pile up on you, and you are having a very difficult time dealing with them. So grief creates kind of a depression that is even more than a normal depression. There's also a profound grief. A profound grief is when there is that amalgamation of things that happen, maybe 2 or 3 losses, and they pile on top of each other, and none of them have been processed to an extent you're able to move forward, so then you're just very much stuck. First, I always tell people, don't let anyone tell you how long you should grieve for, because people will say to you, say you lost a child to a violent death, and after a year they're like, well, shouldn't you be moving forward? No, probably not. You may never leave that. It's when a trauma happens, it's a break in who you were before. Oftentimes I say that the previous self has died and there's a new self that's been born, and that self is born into trauma and grief, and that will always be part of your narrative going forward. It won't be as acute as it is at the moment in that time, but it's not necessarily that 1 year and you're over it. I remember one woman who had a deep loss tell me, the first year was bad, the second year was worse, because the second year I started accepting that this person was not coming back, that they would never be in my life again. The first year I realized that I had some denial about that. So the second year was way worse than the first year for me. So, and I think at anniversaries or as people go forward, sometimes if it's a very traumatic death, say a suicide, I worked with someone whose young daughter had committed suicide 10 years before, and he had been doing very well. He had seen someone, and then he just got to a point at the 10-year mark where it really hit him. Some of her friends were marrying, having children, and for him, just the loss was so terrible. And so there was I would say too, grief is very layered. You may have peeled off that most important layer, in your first, 4 or 5, first to 5th year, but it might be after that 5, 10 years, more things come up, especially as developmental stages happen. So it might be that it's your spouse and your daughter's getting married and their spouse isn't there, and that pushes you backwards. So grief is something that it's kind of moves up and down, or a circular. You move a little bit forward and then you're back, and then you move a little forward and back. And what you really want to do is continue mourning. There's a difference between melancholy and mourning. In melancholy, you're stuck. It's like you're frozen. Like if you think biblically, like Lot's wife looking backwards forever, that pillar of salt. But if you're in mourning, you're bringing the loss with you, but you're moving forward. You're reintegrating into life, and it could be very slight. It doesn't have to be that you jump back into activities in way, shape, or form. And it may be that the activities you choose post the loss are not what you chose before the loss. So, if there's one thing I can say about grief, is it's very individual, the way you manage it, how you manage it, whether you cry every day or you don't cry, whether you feel you can start moving forward or you feel that you're not moving forward at all. So I think it's a real honor to work with people because they're very vulnerable and they're very open and raw in this process. And I feel very lucky to walk with them and help them get along the path that has opened up for them.